the computer, and let's go live on YouTube. Thank you very much. And I continue on and upward in terms of doing the program Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And indeed, this is your intrepid host, Charles Moscowitz, Monday through Friday, 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay, I believe we're now live on YouTube. Thank you very much. And the phone number, if you'd like to join the conversation, is 617-396-4958. That number again is 617-396-4958, as I do the program live Monday through Friday from 12 noon to 1 p.m. Well, it looks like my program has been mentioned in Newsweek magazine, which is certainly a surprise. I don't often get that kind of attention. But yet there it is. Josh Bernstein was a guest on the program last week, and there was an article about him. Let me just see if I can call it up here. Actually, that appeared recently. Basically, I don't even know if I want to get too far into the weeds of what the article said, because it's I could get banned from YouTube for it. But it did mention his appearance on my program, and it mentioned that it refers to him as an extreme right-wing guy and all that stuff, the typical kind of stuff that you'd expect. But which, by the way, I don't know if that's so terrible. I mean, is it? I mean, if I was on the far left, I don't know if I would care if they said I'm a far left wing. Let me just see if I could call this up. Josh Bernstein. Yeah, here we go. It doesn't. No, I don't think I have it. Oh man, you'd think I would have done a little bit of advanced homework to prepare here, but he was written about in a Newsweek, not Newsmax, Newsweek, which is actually a fairly big deal. Doesn't happen every day. And essentially, hello? We have a caller? Okay, no. Anyway, area code 617-396-4958. I'll link to it later on the website. I can't really find it right now, mainly because, of my own ham-handedness. I don't really want to do too much rummaging in the middle of a show. But suffice to say that it talked about his contention that if election irregularities are uncovered, then it could lead to, and he uses a Latin term to describe it, the undoing of an election. Now, I was fairly careful to not endorse that, and I don't. I mean, my attitude and my position is that the election happened, and that Biden and Harris were sworn in, and so thus they are the president and the vice president of the United States, and that we can't undo it. We shouldn't undo it. It's not good for the country, even if they were able to obtain their office in a manner that could be questioned. Let's put it that way. And I applied the same thing to Barack Obama, in that I was never a fan of the question of his birth not being in the United States. That was an issue that was championed by WorldNet Daily and Joseph Farah. And in full disclosure, I should note that they published one of my books, The Nazi Connection to Islamic Terrorism, and they did a great job, and I'm a big supporter. However, I did not like that issue because the fact of the matter is that it was pretty well known in advance of that election that he, probably had not been born in this country. And yet the voters overlooked it. And I think that they've overlooked a lot worse than that when electing people to the presidency. And I respect the will of the voter in that regard. Um, Let me just mention one little aspect about that controversy. And by the way, I supported him because he won. Then there was no controversy around that. I mean, he won both the popular vote and the electoral college. So I didn't in any way quibble with that. I think it was important that he served because he did win. Now with Biden, I mean, there were questions about the whole thing, but that doesn't matter. He was sworn in, and I believe in the consistency of the system. So I don't really agree with Josh on that point. However, he has been written about in Newsweek magazine, and the article mentions this show. He says he was interviewed on the Charles Moscowitz podcast. So, I mean, like any other podcaster or any other radio host, it's great to see a little recognition, even if it's not necessarily nice. There it is. And the article also got into his exposure of Ilhan Omar as having a fraudulent identity, that he claims that she stole her identity from someone else. And the Newsweek inaccurately stated that he had called for her execution, which is not true. What he had done was he said that she was involved in treasonous activity, possibly, and that if that be the case, then she should be charged with it, tried for it, and if convicted, then there are certain solutions that our system allows for as the punishment to treason, and that very well may include the maximum punishment. And so I think that there was a bit more subtlety to those comments, but given that he's on the right, and given at least that he's a challenger to the establishment, that was portrayed by Newsweek in the most unflattering terms possible. However, so I just would mention again, I don't have a link to the article. I should put it up. I'm sorry about that, but it is in Newsweek, and it does mention this show. 617-396-4958 is the number if you'd like to join the conversation. 617-396-4958. My friend Michael Schmidt, the author of Politicrossing, he'll be coming on at another time. I thought he was scheduled today. I could be mistaken. His article is called "Is America Fundamentally Racist?" And it's a very complicated question. I will just as an observation, I don't believe we are fundamentally racist. I think that racism obviously exists. It is the darker side of human nature to have prejudice against various people because of their race or ethnic background or religion. That's just how society works, and I don't think that that's something that's never going to disappear because it is part of human nature. Having said that, there are things we can do as a society to reduce those elements that I think do divide us and that are destructive, and that go back to what Ayn Rand, I think, quite accurately called barnyard socialism. The most basic, primitive form of socialism or collectivism, which was to view a person based upon a collective category as opposed to who they are as individuals. Because after all, we all relate to, or not relate, as the case may be, to our ethnic background, our race, our religion, our region, whatever it may be, based upon however we choose to relate to it, or if we relate to it at all, and some people don't. It's a personal choice. These are personal decisions. They're local mannerisms, even, if you will, in terms of how we see these things and what we do with them. And to place people in these mass categories itself is racist. Now, The theory, of course, the Marxist dialectical theory, which has become predominant as a strategy to disrupt and damage our society, um, was actually, my understanding is historically, it was developed by Franz Fanon, who was a black Marxist from Martinique in the 1950s, who wrote several books, one of which was The Wretched of the Earth, where basically he called for a replacement of the Marxist dialectic, the overall dialectic, which was presented by Karl Marx, of the conspiracy theory of exploitation, the theory that there is an automatic conflict between two classes, what he called the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and that the bourgeoisie was completely controlled by capital, and that they used capital to dominate the proletariats and exploit them just because they did, and that the way to solve the problem was to overthrow the bourgeoisie and distribute capital evenly amongst everyone and create absolute equality. I mean, that was the theory. And Fanon decided to transfer that to race. And by the way, to region. He viewed this whole idea of like the northern hemisphere of the world was oppressing the southern hemisphere of the world. And the idea was to apply the new dialectic, which would be a race dialectic, to the United States as a way to weaken America and as a way to pull apart our cohesion as a society and to undermine our political philosophy, which, even though practiced imperfectly, was based upon a principle of egalitarianism and equality, which is to say that all men and women are equal and possess, we're endowed by our Creator as such, as equal, and as possessing inalienable rights. Now, obviously, America has never practiced this perfectly, of course. No society is perfect, and America has had an extra burden in that we did have slavery and that we do, are, and have always been a multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic society, unlike many other societies, and indeed most other societies in the world, which are not. I mean, Europe has generally been white. Africa, much of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, has been black, even though amongst black people there were different variations, and I suppose amongst whites too. China has been Chinese, India has been Indian. I mean, generally speaking, most societies have maintained certain homogeneous elements of race and ethnicity, whereas the United States has always been a multiracial, multi-ethnic society made up of a dominant white race, of course, which is the settlers from Europe, but also African slaves and Native Americans, and then the introduction of various other races over time. So, we as a result have a weakness in that regard, in that there are racial conflicts, there are racial tensions, there is inequality and has been historically. There's no question historically that the United States has been white supremacist in the de facto sense. We have basically preferred the white race. The 1925 immigration rules were actually meant, and there's no way around to tiptoe around this, they were meant to enhance America as a white society. They limited immigration from Africa and from Asia, and emphasized, and even from Southern Europe, I think, or did they? I don't know, but they emphasized immigration from Europe and from Latin America to the United States. So, yeah, there is a history of that. There's no question about it. So I suppose in the broad sense, sure, you can say that we have a certain degree of systemic racism, but we also need to recognize that, we are the most racially tolerant nation also in history. I mean, both things are true. especially now, particularly since World War II, when we do have opportunities for all races of people to achieve success and to achieve heights that had never been done before. And, I think that this whole idea now of focusing on our racial differences and trying to find a racism under every rock is really regressive in that it goes to the past, and it's negative in that it looks at the glass as half full. I don't think anyone denies that this is an issue and a problem. But, the movement now is basically to turn the question of race conflict into a political football. Um, I'll say this with respect, and I want to be careful here, but this is sort of what the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith has done to anti-Semitism, quite honestly. On the one hand, and I'm speaking here, by the way, as a Jew and as a Jewish background, on the one hand, they have done and continue to do important work of identifying genuine anti-Semitism in the society. On the other hand, they also have tended to call any group or person that doesn't agree with a liberal left view as anti Semitic, which is wrong. It's politicizing and weaponizing what otherwise is a genuine thing. I'm going to give a quick, I don't know, thought. I mean, there's a story right now in Boston about this high school coach who, I believe he's up in Swampscott or some suburb, who apparently, this high school football coach who is using Jewish terms to describe various football maneuvers. And now he's been fired and removed, and it's a big scandal in the end. The Defamation League has marched in, and then, they've demanded. Now, I mean, I don't know what he was saying. What is he calling this? Hey, attack this guy's a schmuck and that guy's a putz. I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly what those terms were. I'd like to know it. Probably, I mean, we could maybe in the old days have a little comedy routine about it. But either way, I mean, for God's sakes, I mean, this is like, I mean, I'm more concerned with the fact that this murderer in Boulder, Colorado, apparently was planning, according to sources, to attack a synagogue and a Catholic church, and that, according to sources, there are people in his family, including his own brother, who have now been picked up. To me, that's an anti-Semitic situation. Okay. I mean, really, I mean, why don't we talk about that? I mean, the point is that, we're going to trivialize this issue and destroy people's careers. And in a way, I suppose it shows how far we've come, because we don't have the kind of old, ugly Jim Crow sort of racism where people really are shut down and denied opportunity and hurt and physically assaulted. That's become extremely rare in this country. So we have to conflate, these less important and almost trivial, and I mean, I don't want to use the word trivial, but let's just say cosmetic aspects and factors to make something into a much bigger deal than it needs to be made into. And it's something that I think is primarily used against, because it's the left running it and because they have their dialectic. They are using this as a way to attack people who are perceived to be white, particularly white men. I'll give another example, and I'm not going to mention his name, but I follow various people on TikTok, and I'm very active on TikTok. I've got a big following there, and I put together live streams and 30-second spots. Well, there's this guy that I follow on TikTok, and he and I have gone back and forth, he's a hater of Trump, and he's generally liberal. And he went out with a TikTok saying that the guy in Boulder, Colorado, was a white supremacist and was a a lover, was a part of the MAGA crowd, and did so before we really had the facts in. And this is what's happened, because it turns out that that was completely untrue. He is actually a Trump hater and had Facebook, ironically and interestingly, has purged his various posts and his site, which indicate that, because it didn't fit a narrative, I suppose, where he obviously was a Trump hater and he was obsessed with anti-Muslim, um, messages, and this whole, in a way, this whole dialectical view. Somebody who is absolutely a practitioner of that, and that he, in fact, is a Syrian refugee. I don't want to go too far into that because, again, we can't really. Well, I want to be careful not to, be seen as labeling all people, because I don't. But there are questions about whether or not he might have been involved with jihadism and with ISIS. I mean, there might be a connection between that and the fact that he went in and he opened fire in a supermarket, killing 10 people. Okay, let's leave it at that. And maybe there's a connection between that and the fact that President Biden, a few weeks after being sworn in, started to bomb Syria. Was that a factor? We don't know. The point I'm bringing up here is that, everything has become so politicized based upon the narrative that needs to be amplified here by the left in order to create division, which is that everything is race based and ethnic based, and that this is a racist country, and that anybody that is not a minority, or anybody, particularly a white man, a white straight man, is inherently not only racist but is privileged. This morning, I was watching a local Boston broadcast that talked about the fact that our mayor, Marty Walsh, has just been sworn in as Secretary of Labor, and that the person who replaced him as acting mayor, Janney, happens to be an African American woman. And this broadcast was making a big deal out of this, and that's fine. It is interesting. Boston never had that before. Um, and the two experts that they had on both happen to be African American. One is a professor of political science, and the other is a major Boston businessman in at high level. They both, particularly the man, was talking about, oh, Black people are oppressed in this city, and Boston is basically racist, and this is a big step away from that. And it just, I'm sorry, but it occurs to me that here are two people being interviewed about this who are a lot more accomplished than I probably will ever be, and a lot more successful. Would anybody say they were privileged? No, they earned it. And, and yet they're so focused on this paradigm of racial oppression. I mean, look, Boston has had racial conflict, but wouldn't it be a little bit more instructive and a bit more edifying to talk about how far we've come and why we've come that far and what are some of the solutions to these problems? I mean, if someone is going to be, racist, or in the sense that they're going to make insulting comments, I don't know if there's much that could be done about that other than to, yes, shun them and make sure that they know better, and to treat people with respect, and to mix with people more and get to know people so that we can know each other on a human level. But putting that aside, I mean, isn't there a way we can maybe take a look at the successful side of things? I mean, I think that the reason maybe that we're not is because of this leftist agenda, which supports things that have nothing to do with race. And it's the same agenda that was opposed to President Donald Trump. This is a kind of an internationalist, corporatist, elitist uh, worldview that views things like national sovereignty, local government control, faith, belief in God, belief in conventional family, that these things are all not just anachronisms, but they're actually prejudice. They're bigoted institutions that need to be weakened and eventually abolished. And so, they don't want to look at, therefore, because of this subtle agenda, and in some cases not so subtle, they don't want to look at modalities that have reduced racism as an actual problem. Maybe it hasn't reduced enough racism in terms of making stupid and offensive comments, but in the real sense, it has reduced racism by making sure that people of color and minorities have a greater opportunities in life, have greater educational opportunities and employment and business and academia and intellectual and all the rest, just like the same blessings that and benefits that we all strive to have. Because if they did do that and they did make that examination, they would discover, frankly, that the policies and programs that were put forth by and represented by President Donald Trump were very effective programs that actually did go a long way toward improving the lives of all Americans, including people of color, did do a lot to reduce racism and, should be applauded. They don't want to do that. So instead, they're going to amplify the more, I don't know, marginalized, cosmetic, over exaggerated elements of race. Now, why do I say that I think Trump did a lot to reduce racism? Very concrete reasons. The First Step Act, which would have been just that, a first step toward eradicating these, quite frankly, these racist laws that were put in place during the Clinton administration that incarcerated tens of thousands and still do of predominantly African American men for minor crimes. We shouldn't be doing that. That's wrong. President Trump worked hard to pass legislation, and he got bipartisan support. Some of even the Trump haters signed on to reduce it, to reduce those sentences, to get rid of some of these mandatory prison sentences. And the result was upwards of 10,000 men, predominantly Black, were released from prison. This was a step in that direction. Things like permanent funding for historically Black colleges with scholarships, things like enterprise zones for inner cities where you had almost a generation of liberal left-wing anti-business, anti-entrepreneurial attitudes and approaches. This was to try to help foster the development of Black-owned businesses and help them expand and help offer, low-interest loans. And there was funding for the Small Business Administration to help do that, and zoning regulations that would help that, housing regulations that would not create these old left-wing Section 8 housing blocks, but instead integrate Section 8 housing into middle class and even upper class communities so that, with conditions attached. There was some amazing experiments being done in that regard by the Department of Housing and Urban Development under the tutorship of Ben Carson, and other modalities that actually did a lot to reduce racial disparity and increase opportunity. Economic policies that protected American industry from cheap imports, things like tariffs, which protect American labor and American industry. Things like the Sunset Rule, which reduced onerous regulation on businesses. Every time a new regulation would be created, two bad regulations would have to be sunsetted. This allows for business, for capital accumulation and for creation of investment and growth, which helps all people, including people of color. Maintaining a line on high taxes so that people can keep more of that which they earned and invest that capital either into the economy by investment or consume it, by which case other economic, other business ventures can grow, and other similar programs. They don't want to talk about that because they would rather point fingers and talk about, frankly, more unsubstantiated and even trivial charges. Now, I already talked controversially about the situation in Boulder, Colorado. I don't want to go further into that because I'm concerned that the station could be taken down. But I also want to address the business of what happened with this mass murderer in Atlanta, this guy who shot up 3 massage parlors and murdered 8 women, 6 of whom happened to be Asian. The immediate portrayal of this by the dialectically oriented liberal establishment and its media was that this is part of a national anti-Asian development, with the implication that President Trump was to blame because he talked about the Wuhan virus or the China virus. And again, I think this is largely untrue. I think this is another piece of a conspiracy, kind of a blue anon type thing, if you don't mind. Yeah, I like Ben Carson too. And, I don't doubt that this might have had something to do with it. I'm not, and I certainly appreciate and respect concern about this amongst the Asian community. I know that there could possibly have been, and I don't doubt that there has been, an increase perhaps in insulting comments directed at Asians. I know that I mentioned the other day that during the Iran hostage crisis of 1980, I would happen to be in a business district in Quincy, where I grew up in a suburb of Boston. And this carload of guys drove up and they stuck their head out the window and started screaming, "You dirty Arab," to me, and worse, and used, more vulgar terms. And, it kind of was like, gee, I mean, first of all, I don't happen to be Arab, but I also don't look like, your typical type of, Irish white person that lived in Quincy at that time. Quincy's become much more integrated since. But, yeah, I mean, I don't doubt that, some of that, and nothing more came of that, by the way. I don't doubt that some of that isn't being directed at Asians. I think it probably is. But in the broader sense, I don't think that that's happening in terms of real discrimination. I don't think Asians are being prevented from achieving any of the benefits they want to achieve in the society. I think that they feel perfectly safe walking around. I mean, the way this is portrayed by the dialectical left is really inflated, and it's really destructive. And as far as, again, just in a way, just like the Boulder situation, just like the overall concept to avoid a discussion about the successes of the Trump administration, I think that this attack on this claim that somehow now America is systemically racist against Asian Americans is avoiding what might have really happened over there in Atlanta. I don't want to go too deeply into this again because I could get taken down. But what is known is that this guy was claimed to be suffering from what he called a sex addiction, that he had been in therapy for this for many years, that he would go to these specific massage parlors because he wanted, to be blunt, I don't know how else to say it, but he wanted to be serviced. And, you know, he was obsessed with pornography, and he juxtaposed that with his religious background, by which he started to feel it started to drive him insane. I'm not apologizing for this. He's a brutal murderer. He's a terrorist, and he should be charged with that, and you know, and face all the consequences of that. But I'm saying that we need to take a look at possible the phenomena and the proliferation of sexual images in our society and how this is affecting particularly men, and particularly at a time of pandemic where people are stuck inside. They don't have as much human contact with real people as they might otherwise have, and that they're starting to they're probably looking at porn, and it's creating a dissonance. um, it gets into a broader question of the sexualization of America, deliberately so, by change agents, and how this has affected the male view of women, how it's affected marriage, how it's affected sexuality. I mean, I know I mentioned it yesterday, and I'm going to bring it up briefly again, but I would contend that a good example recently of this was the behavior of Cardi B during the Grammy Awards. Just really degraded, singing about a portion of her anatomy in a really vulgar way, rapping about the most disgusting images, basically humping the stage. I mean, just totally, this is supposed to be sexual. I mean, again, I would think that more, we ought to encourage a more wholesome sexuality, which involves romance, which involves genuine communication between people who respect each other and who aren't just, it's not just lust. Maybe that's part of it, but it's something more edifying, more uplifting, and that indeed we ought to openly and brazenly say that the sexual act should be done in a context that is sacred. It should be sacralized. It should be through a marriage, which is a religious ceremony. And it should be done as a way to understand the importance of that as a means to create a family. Now, we're going to be attacked. I mean, if you say this now, oh my God, it's, you're a bigot. You got something against someone who wants to do something else. I'm not telling anybody what to do. I'm simply pointing out that, society has certain strictures that ought to be upheld, and that there are consequences when society does not do that, and that this event, this mass murder, may be one of them. I'm not saying it is. I have no idea. But in the same way that when there's a plane crash, right, we have what's the agency? The transportation authority goes in and they take a look at it. They do a full investigation. What happened? Why did the plane crash? Was it design flaws? Was it stress? Was it the plane was too old? Was it human error? Was the pilot drunk? I mean, whatever it is, they do a full investigation and they file a report. Sometimes it's debated in Congress, and we find out what happened and if there can be changes made that might improve safety. That's what we should be doing in these cases, not politicizing it, not running out. Should we ban certain assault weapons? Maybe. I don't know. I don't say we shouldn't. I mean, I don't, maybe I tend to be a little bit, I'm not hard left or right on that issue. But we shouldn't, before running in with these things, we ought to have an investigation about the person that did it, who they were, what motivated them, what was going on, and to do so dispassionately and honestly in the same way that we would do an investigation of a plane crash. Let's be scientific about this, because otherwise we're going to be setting ourselves up for more problems. And let's look at the results of that study and do so with objectivity and with an eye toward making reasonable and prudent changes so these things don't happen again, or at least they happen a lot less. I'll give an example. And this might PO some people who don't like the state of Israel, okay? But the state of Israel, in maybe it was around 2005, 2004, it was in the years right after the 9/11 attack, okay? There was an epidemic of people who were crossing into Israel and blowing themselves up with the purpose of killing as many Jewish men, women, and children and Holocaust survivors as possible. And they called them suicide bombers. They bombed a Seder in near Tel Aviv, right? Terrible, terrible images of something like 50 people dead. They bombed everything they could. Israel responded by creating a wall, a fence with checkpoints so that people who could be identified as coming into Israel from a certain area could be stopped. Now, Israel's been criticized for this by, people on the left and by others. But the fact of the matter is that it worked. It cut down by something like 98% the number of people doing this. And thus, Israel figured out how to save the lives and the property of its own people, which is a basic obligation of any nation, of any sovereign people. And so we need to take that same measure now. What is causing this in these people? And what can we do to improve and to stop it so it doesn't happen again? It's just that simple. Instead of jumping in and politicizing, oh, it's because of Donald Trump. No, let's not go there. Let's, stop using this as a political football. And overall, and I'm going to sign off soon, but overall, that is my complaint about people who are talking about systemic racism. Okay, fine. We have racism as part of our history, and yeah, sure, it exists. But let's talk about some genuine practical solutions that would reduce these things: economic, cultural, political solutions, instead of year after year hearing this used as a political football to attack enemies of the left and to create division. All right, so I think that I'm going to wrap it up at this point. I want to thank you for joining me. Sorry I didn't give out the phone number enough, so I really haven't taken any calls. Maybe let me just give it out one more time. You're welcome to join 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. I have, coming up at 2 o'clock, I've got Michael D. Shaw joining me. I will not be running this program on YouTube because the last time I did, I was suspended for 7 days. He talks about the pandemic. He talks about the vaccine. He's got controversial things to say. I'm not going to make any bones about it, but it's forbidden on YouTube. And by the way, speaking of the vaccine, I should make note of the fact that I am scheduled to get the vaccine this Friday morning. I won't be doing any broadcasting that day. I'm nervous about it. I'm also grateful for it. I got both things going on, but I'm not against it. I mean, it's just, I just want to make that point. Maybe I might live to rue the day. Maybe we all will. I don't know, but I'm not coming out against it. So that'll be a 2. You're not going to hear it on YouTube, but you can check it out on all of my other venues. And I'm on many at this point. Let me just tell you the names of those venues so you can check out that program. Let me just go to Restream and do that. And let me just see here. I wish I could. It would be nice if I could do these things seamlessly, wouldn't it? Let's see. Restream. Here we go. The show is heard, the live stream for this program when I'm not on YouTube is on Twitch, Vaughn, YouNow, DLive, Facebook, Periscope, VK, Daily Motion, Picardo, and Trovo. So the program is also will be archived on Minds and Rumble, and it will be available on Podomatic, which makes the audio and video available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and several other venues. You can check it all out because I don't expect anyone to remember this, but you can check it all out by going to my website, which is charlesmoskowitz.com. Click on About Charles Moskowitz Live, and you will see a full list of all of the various venues that carry the show. So, on that note, I want to thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'd appreciate that. Charles Moskowitz Live. And please subscribe to me on TikTok. And my books, of course, are available at Amazon Books. Just put my name in the server, Charles Moskowitz. I've got a new book that's about to come out. I'm writing these short pamphlet-style books. This will be my third one. This is going to be called How to Win an Election, where I get into several strategies where local candidates, not state or national, but local candidates can begin to win elections. And I'm also going to be making myself available as a consultant to local candidates around the country to help them strategize how to do it. So that should be coming out this week. Actually, I'm on the verge of finishing. My goal is to have it done by the end of the month. That'll be available at Amazon Books, How to Win an Election. It'll be a short book. It'll be under $3, so I'm not asking for a lot of money for it. And so anyway, thank you for joining me, everyone. Charles Moskowitz. Have a great afternoon. God bless you all. God bless America.